Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my sound. I hope everyone is doing okay this morning. I'm getting my shows out the way early. I'm going to try to start doing my shows in the morning if I can, depending on what's taking place around the day. I've been doing mini spots in DC recently, so I've been taking road trips. Playback. Let's disable that. There we are. Good. All right. So just a heads up. Channel demonetized. Super chat demonetized. Alternative to super chat is below. Any donations will bring up a Star Trek icon. The Star Trek icon changes and depends on the donations. All right, and you can see there's Mr. Patrick Stewart here. Because I'm going to show something, and I'm going to ask, what would Patrick Stewart say? What would a rational human being say, looking at the situation? Meaning, if you unplug yourself and you were sitting on the moon, if you were on the Starship Enterprise and Patrick Stewart was standing there with his perfectly bald head, looking at the planet Earth, and he saw something, and he was engaged by one of the doctors or somebody else on the ship. Let's say Wesley Crusher turned to Captain Picard and said something to him. What would Picard say? First thing, in Iran, somebody posted this and said, human rights in Iran. And let's take a look. Let's flip over. Something's wrong. All right, here we are. There we go. Good. All right. Human rights in Iran. Young woman is beaten up by country's female Islamic morality police. Her crime, she's not covering her hair fully and let part of it show under the regime's compulsory hijab law. There's a law that apparently says you need to cover your hair, and this woman is not covering her hair, and apparently she's about to get a beat down for it.
تو رو خدا بسه نکنی بچه ها تو غلط میکنی خود نکن بتبر
That's, of course, terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. Let me see. Hold on. Something has gone awry. Give me 1 second, guys. Yeah, something's weird is happening. Hold on. There we are. That's utterly terrifying. That's completely and incomprehensibly terrifying. I don't know what I would think if I was in that place. I would imagine that that girl who was getting beaten up, or that woman, was utterly terrified. I would imagine the people who were doing the beating thought that they were well within their rights to beat the living shit out of her. If it's the law of their land, it became the law of their land. Now, here's the thing. I don't like it. It goes against my sensibilities. I don't think you should beat up a person for what they're not wearing on their head. I think that's stupid. If you're asking me, what do I personally believe about that? My own sensibility in people being free and people having this idea of self-determination is that's fucking ridiculous. You shouldn't beat people up because of their fashion choices. I think that's a problem. Now, does that mean I want to bomb Iran? No, it does not. Does that mean I think that there's something wrong with that? Yes, it does. Those are my own personal sensibilities. Their society, however, disagrees with me. And at the very least, their society is continuing to enact certain ideas and going in certain cultural themes that allows that to take place. I don't have to like it. But me not liking it doesn't necessarily mean I want to bomb Iran. It just means that they have certain cultural traditions that I think are valid and frankly belong in the past. Now, the secondary question becomes, why does Iran have those traditions? Because Jean-Luc Picard wouldn't look at this in the specific moment of that woman getting beaten up. Jean-Luc Picard would say that's horrendous. He would probably say something similar to me. And he would say, well, Iran used to have a secular government. And at one point when they had this secular government, that government decided that the oil revenue in that country should go in a larger part to the people of that country. That was when that secular government was overthrown with a brutal dictator being put in that was essentially a puppet of the British and the Western powers or the American governments. This is history of Iran. This is necessary because that brutal dictator, that Shah, was overturned, and who ended up in this place was essentially a religious theocratic maniac, Ayatollah. This is necessary history of Iran. And like any other country, at the end of a revolution, you cobble together something and you go. And you make small changes incrementally along the way as you go about your way. And you either make it or you fail as you go about your way. The American Revolution was no different. All revolutions are the same. The Russian Revolution was the same thing. They cobbled together what they had after the end of wars and everything else. And they went from where they were. Now, I say that to say that this woman who's getting beat up, there was a person, these women were born in a society. They got up that morning. They don't think they're bad people. They think they're perfectly okay. They were getting a job under the law that said that they were doing X, Y, Z. And in activating their laws or their parties, they were discharging their powers to beat the living hell out of that girl for not having a hairnet. It is perfectly absurd. And yet, they believe that what they're doing is absolutely right. They are within a system. They were born and raised and would die within a system that told them that what they just did there was absolutely, completely correct. I don't have to like it. I can recall, however, the steps along the way that got them to the point that they are now. I can understand from a history, per se, not like I'm living in the country, but from an outside perspective of this is the main points in the history of Iran, at least in recent history. Again, doesn't mean I like it. Doesn't mean I support it. No, I don't want to go to war with it. No, I don't want to fuck around with it. If the people themselves want to get rid of that, the people themselves would get around to getting rid of that. It just takes time. The problem with this is you have outside instigators that are always actively at them. So those nations are always hostile also. Meaning this is not taking place in a sandbox. Let's back out of this for the moment. Let's look. What about this one? What's the excuse here?
The fight break out, stop. The people that's fighting is gonna walk away? Are you serious? I didn't do nothing. Let go. Take you nothing what? I didn't sell anything. did nothing. We sitting here the whole time, minding our business. What are you talking about? You watch me do what? Who did I sell cigarette to? To whom? Easy way or hard way for what? Every time you see me, you want to mess with me. I'm tired of it. It stops today.
This guy right here is forcibly trying to lock somebody up for breaking up a fight.
Everybody standing here, they told you I didn't do nothing. I did not sell nothing. Because every time you see me, you want to harass me, you want to stop me, trying to sell cigarettes. I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone.
Hold on.
No, listen, don't touch me, please. Do not touch me.
That's the outcome. He's screaming for air. He can't breathe. Some of the cops were mocking him with the whole I can't breathe thing. They killed him for selling Lucy's cigarettes. What's the difference? Honestly, what's the difference? You have two different religious beliefs. One religious belief says that the person can't necessarily wear some hijab, whatever, and they've organized their society in a way where they have cops out there patrolling for that particular ridiculous idea. In our society, according to them, take the cops at their word. He was selling Lucy's. They eventually ends up getting physical, meaning escalating a situation with him for selling Lucy's where they choke a man to death on the sidewalk. In one case, you have a religious fervor against the showing of hair or whatever. In another case, you have a religious fervor against the selling of cigarettes. Lucy's. I don't see the difference here. Those look the same to me. It looks like a group of women beating a woman, and then in another case, it looks like a group of men choking a guy. Both having their ideals that they believe that they're doing is right, neither of which thinking that they're horrible people in the process of doing it, all of which are horrible people for doing it. Capitalism is a religious belief. I have a hard time seeing why that's different than any other religious belief. Now, you can say all thought forms to some degree are religious beliefs, because you get into this idea of what does a religious belief mean in the first place. But whatever, besides the point. Taking out, let's just say thought forms. This idea, this organization of thought, this idea and ideology. You have an ideology that allowed the choking of a man to death on the sidewalk, and you have an ideology that allowed the beating a person in this other case. Both are just ideologies. In one case, the ideology was strong enough to allow them to kill a person. That ideology, the thought, mattered more than that person's life. And in another case, I don't know if the other woman died from that beating, but nevertheless, you saw it was a pretty unsavory affair. Jean-Luc Picard would say that those societies evolved in ways based on incentives and based on things that were implicit and explicit pushes. Meaning it started from a particular place, it made incremental moves, in some cases it jumps as it went along its path, culturally. That's what he would say. He would say that these things, to some degree, are the same, because these things are. Now, the people who are living in the society would justify why it's okay for that woman to get beat that way, in the same way you have Fox News justifying why it's okay to choke the other guy to death. But clearly, something is fundamentally wrong in your society if you get to a point where there is one faction that is stopping somebody for something as ridiculous as selling a cigarette, and another faction who is pissed off for something. You have to interrogate, why was he pissed off? You have to interrogate, why was a chokehold being used? All of that stuff would have to be added into your choice. But the honest conversation, or the conversation that takes place in America, is not around that. It gets related in racial lines. It gets taken into, well, this officer is doing something and he was resisting the law. Fundamentally missing the point that he was resisting because he was pissed off at getting continuously stopped for nonsense. Not to mention that cop had already had some kind of charge against him for that chokehold before. Both things are fucking ridiculous. That's what I'm saying. Both things are cultural relics. Our society has not grown out of these kind of ideological things in which we're willing to kill and beat and injure and maim other human beings. So Jean-Luc Picard will look at this beating and say that culture needs to grow. He will look at this and say the same. We're not that different. We're not that divided. That's my point. I saw this video on Twitter, and I assumed that the point that the person was trying to make on Twitter was, oh wow, look at what takes place in Iran. And my point is, oh wow, look at what takes place in America. Both of those things are cultural relics. Both countries are backwards in some regard. You have a cop that will lock somebody up for smoking a plant while being an alcoholic. That's utterly ridiculous, completely absurd. And yet that person will get put into either a chokehold, killed, or put in prison. I'm going to end this here. This video doesn't fully have a point other than saying other cultures are different. That's it. What you consider to be cultural, horrific, and everything else and bad, sometimes those things are. But bad in relation to what? Oftentimes it's a perspective. You have an American perspective. And that American perspective is rubbing up against other perspectives around the world. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a worse or bad, or that yours are better or good. They're different. There's some cases, depending upon what you're basing it on, meaning I would say from a humanitarian perspective, XYZ is true. I may say from a perspective of just getting stuff done, let's say a productivity perspective, XYZ is true. But something is not good or bad as an absolute. They're good as bad in relation to something else. Showing a video and saying this is justice in Iran, as if the same thing or something similar doesn't take place in America, is utter folly. So I'm going to end it here. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.